Hey, what's up everybody? I just got done using the Nishika 9000 3D camera and I thought I should just make a short video highlighting how I used it and what my experience was like. First I'll explain a little bit about the camera. It was made in the 80s. Its purpose is primarily to take 3D pictures that you can make into a holographic image. But now people primarily use it to make this boomerang effect that you probably have seen on Instagram and other places. It's essentially, it looks like a boomerang, but it's not really a boomerang because the image is fixed or the subject is fixed and it looks like it's moving around the subject like this right here. So it's not your typical boomerang where a boomerang you're actually moving in the image. In this, the subject is actually still in the image. I used this recently for a music video I just shot. I wanted to throw in some gimmicky effects. I first saw this on the Mura Masa What If I Go video. That was it. The Mura Masa What If I Go video, which I'll link below. I'll also add a link to the music video I shot. They used it very creatively throughout the music video. Before I got the camera, I did a fair amount of research. There's a lot of good videos on YouTube explaining how to use it, but I thought I should just make my own, kind of highlighting what I did and the mistakes I made, because I did make some mistakes starting out. And hopefully it helps when you're using another 3D camera, either the 8000 or the 9000, which I think are very similar. So this is it, the Nishika 9000. It's a pretty simple little camera. It's all plastic, as you can tell. It feels kind of cheap, but it gets the job done. There's a hot shoe mount here, which I'll explain later, but you can use to put a flash in there. But essentially, it's a 35mm camera that takes 2 frames from 4 different lenses right here, and that's how you get that 3D effect once you stitch them in post. Each photo is a different length away, so that's how you get that movement effect. One thing to remember, it takes 2 pictures per click of the camera. So whatever your roll count is, say it's 36 shots on your roll of film, divide that by 2, and that's how many shots you'll be really getting. I made this mistake thinking I had 36 shots, not realizing that I really had 18, so I ran out pretty quickly. The film stock I used was Kodak Porta 800, which I'll link below. It's roughly 10 bucks at any camera store, and to get it processed and converted digitally, it cost me around $15, which is probably on the expensive side, but I don't really do this that much, so it was fine. The film stock I chose was a higher ISO film stock, so it's more sensitive to nighttime shooting. So you'd want to take that into consideration whether you're going to be shooting primarily during the day or at night. Since I was also filming at night, I used one of those old school flashes that I put on here, like that. It worked great for what I needed, but I would definitely recommend that if you're going to be shooting at night, to use a flash, because there's not much control over aperture on this camera. As you can see, there is a daylight and there's like a cloudy aperture setting, and I believe the daylight setting is f19 and the shade is around an f11. From what I've heard, I don't know if that's 100% true, that's just what I've been told. So as you can see, you can click between one another pretty easily, and that's really all the control you have on the aperture, so you don't have a lot of control. I've never used the 8000 personally, but from what I've seen, it looks pretty similar, except I think you have one more control on the aperture, or one more setting on the aperture. Other than that, there's not really much else besides the 4 lenses here, the aperture control, and then this is the back where you load your film in. I'm going to assume that you know how to load film into a camera, so I'm not going to show you how to do that. But I mean, that's pretty much it. Honestly, it's pretty simple to use. A child could use this. I think that's how it was designed, so it's not a complex camera at all. One thing to remember too, I know this sounds obvious, but if you want to get the 3D effect, make sure your camera is always horizontal. I made the mistake of taking a couple shots vertically, not realizing that the 3D effect won't work vertically, because you need that axis, that horizontal axis, to actually get that look. So I took a couple vertically. The images looked fine, but I can't really use them for the effect that I wanted. And that's really the only reason that you're gonna get this camera, is just to do that movement effect. Once you're done taking your pictures, you're going to want to get your film developed and digitally scanned. There's multiple ways you can do that. The cheapest option is probably better, but I'll show you how to stitch them together in post now. I used Final Cut. I know Photoshop is probably better to use, but I edit primarily on Final Cut and I wanted to try it that way to see if it works. So if you're interested to know how to stitch them together in Final Cut, I'll show you right now. Alright, so here we are in Final Cut. I already imported the photos above here. So I'll start bringing them down into the timeline, at least for the GIF that I want to make. Sorry for the music in the background. My upstairs neighbor loves his bass. But here we are. We have our photos down here in the timeline, and this is what the photos look like when they're developed. They come in twos. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shoot to make a GIF out of this image. So once I have my photos down here, I will crop this image like so. So I'm just highlighting this one image. And I'm just going to put it over here in the middle like so. So this is my first image and this will be my base, and we're going to build kind of a pyramid. So my next image is right here, and I'm just going to cut this one in half because we're going to use both of these images, and I'm going to crop up this first one first. And I'm just going to find the edge right here where the first photo ends, and I'm going to drag it on top of our base photo. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here and I'm going to bring the opacity on this top one down to 40, around 40. That seems to work. And I'm just going to drag it over the bottom one and align it with the eyes. And I use the eyes quite a bit because I feel like that's the best way, the easiest way to align the photos. It's easiest to use the eyes as a reference. I've found you can really use anything in the foreground to align it, but just make sure you don't align it with anything in the background, because the background is where you want your movement. The foreground is where you want your image to stay focused on. And going back, there's some things I would have done differently. I would have made sure all my subjects were 5 or 6 feet in front of the camera, and I would have made sure that my background was more distinctive. So you want a bit of depth here. You want your subject that you're going to focus on close enough to the camera where you can pretty much focus on them and have the movement all going on in the background. And in order to do that, you need a background that kind of stands out or is distinctive enough to give contrast to the foreground. So here we go. We lined up our first picture with the eyes right here. And now I'm going to go ahead and move the opacity back to 100. So it's going to be normal. Now we're going to go over here to our third picture, and we're just going to do the same thing. We're going to crop this one up. And then move it over to the center. Click done, and I'm going to move it on top of the second image. So you can see we're kind of forming a pyramid here. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to knock this down to 40 opacity, and I'm just going to line it up with the eyes again. And that looks good. So I'm going to click done, bring my opacity back to normal, and then we're going to go on to the last photo. And I'm just going to crop this up, go down to the edge of the photo over here, maybe move it more towards the center. Click done, and I'm going to lay it on top. So you're going to have 4 layers. And I'm going to do the exact same thing with the other ones. I'm going to bring the opacity down to 40, and I'm going to line it up with the eyes. And I think that's good. Let's bring the opacity back to 100, and let's just see how it looks real quick. Okay. So it looks like it's lined up, but we're not done yet. So what I like to do, this is just me, is I like to make sure there's 2 frames in between each level. Some people like to do 4, some like to do 3. I like 2 because it's a little bit quicker, but that's just personal preference. So I'm gonna go to the edge of our first layer, and I'm gonna go over 2 frames, and I'm gonna make sure this one is lined up there. And snapping works pretty well to help you with this. I'm gonna do the same thing with the next level. Go over 2 frames. I'm gonna make sure this is aligned up right there. I'm gonna do the same thing. Go over 2 frames and make sure it's lined up. And then I'm gonna do the same thing because we're gonna build a pyramid. So go over 2 frames. I'm just gonna cut that off. Do the same thing. Go over 2 frames. Oops, went too far. And I'm just going to use my blade tool, and I'm going to cut that off. Oops, I messed up there. And so I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to cut this off. And there you go. And for this last one, you want to make sure that the bottom layer is not sticking out over the second layer, because you're going to eventually duplicate this, and you want it to be smooth. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So we have our pyramid here, and now I'm going to go through briefly, and I'm just going to do a little color correction so the photos match. And as you can see, we already have that moving effect a little bit. But I just want to make sure the photos look seamless when I play them back. So I'm going to go to this bottom layer, and I'm going to press Control-Shift-2. I'm going to bring up my color board. I'm going to go to the main view here, make sure it's on Luma, and we're just going to do a little color correction, mostly just dealing with exposure. I'm going to bring this down a little bit. So I think this looks good now, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the color correction I made on this bottom layer, and I'm going to paste it to these 3 layers. So I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm going to select these all, and I copied the settings down here. I'm going to go to Paste Attributes, and I'm going to make sure the only thing that's checked is color board. And I'm going to paste that, and let's see what it looks like. So as you can see, they're still not all the same, so I'm going to have to go through and tweak them a bit. So I got the color roughly to match, and I think it looks pretty good now. It's pretty seamless. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a compound clip out of all these layers. I'm going to select all of them. I'm going to go to New Compound Clip. So there you go. You have your compound clip. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to press Control-0, get out of my color correcting tools, and I'm just going to crop this a little bit to get rid of these edges. So I think it's roughly how I'd like it. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this compound clip, and I'm just going to paste it down a couple times. Really, however many times you want. I mean, this is just going to determine how long your GIF is. And so I laid it all out, and let's see it in real time. And there you go. So now you have all your compound clips laid out, and I did it roughly 6 or 7 times. And now I'm just going to make another compound clip. You don't have to do this. And I have my new compound clip, and there's your GIF. And as you can see, this isn't perfect. One of the frames, I think I accidentally covered up the top with my finger. So just make sure that you keep your finger out of the lenses because they're kind of wide. And like I said before, my subject is probably 8 or 9 feet away from the camera, which is a little far. In retrospect, what I would have done is I would have had her about 5 or 6 feet in front of the camera, and I would have made sure that I had a background with a little bit more depth, maybe some lights up here, just to see the background a little bit more and get that movement effect. So, but this one looks okay. overall, this camera is pretty easy to use. There's just a bit of a learning curve. Going back, I probably would have done some things differently, but hopefully you don't make those same mistakes. And just kind of try it out and see what works best for you.